Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the first ever collaborative record between Jay-Z and Beyonce, Everything is Love. You would think this would feel bigger. That's the thought that's been lingering on my mind the past couple days in the wake of the surprise album from Jay-Z and Beyonce. Their first ever as a couple and already hailed by some as the triumphant conclusion to a multi-year arc where hip-hop's most notable power couple laid their grievances to rest once and for all, and then celebrated their love amidst overflowing stacks of money and fine art and, maybe that's what's it. A larger culture, and especially the younger generation, just unable to relate to the dizzying heights of Jay-Z's business ventures and wealth and Beyonce's, well, everything, that they've just given up. They've stopped paying attention altogether. I'll freely admit that was a major niggling issue that ran through my coverage of 444 last year, but it has run deeper. I am far from the first person to point this out, with numerous black publications and essays being circulated on how in the larger American class war at the forefront right now, Jay and Beyonce somehow wound up on the wrong side. And that's not to take away from their success or even their cult of personality. Both are great artists, and I really do love both Lemonade and 444, albums that really are enabled and given their drama by that cult of personality. But it's been increasingly difficult to overlook how said cult has been assembled through black artistic associations and appropriations that are not their own, or that as much as Jay-Z has sought to pass on aspirational financial advice, or for those just to bask in Beyonce's mere presence, it's always come with a pretty hefty price tag. And yet for me, it's always been the more grounded and human moments in their relationship and their art that has pulled me back in. When the pinnacle has fractures or outright collapses, that we got actual human stakes in the drama. So yeah, I wasn't exactly lining up for the victory lap that some people have said Everything is Love represents. They ran out the goddamn Louvre for the video, for God's sakes. But again, they're both great artists. I had hopes this would turn out at least to be pretty decent, so what do we get with Everything is Love? Well, I'll say it outright. If you're enamored enough with the Beyonce, Jay-Z cult of personality, you're willing to accept from them making a lightweight victory lap record that barely even attempts to have the insight or heft of previous releases in favor of auto-tuned triplet flows and trap production, well, hell, you might enjoy it. But to me, and to be really blunt, it's hard for me to consider this as anything more than Magna Carta Holy Grail Part 2, an inconsequential follow-up that relies more on legacy for any gut punches or flair, while parodying a lot of modern styles that do very little to flatter either artist. And it lends evidence to why Everything is Love is not being as celebrated or getting talked about by as many people. It's just not nearly as good. And the first thing that needs to be considered and addressed is how this album is being pushed and marketed, at the very least by some elements of the music press, as a conclusion to a trilogy that started with Lemonade and 444. And I'd argue that's about the worst possible connection you would want to create an association in your mind, because it sets up stakes that Everything is Love cannot possibly match. It also misses the reasons why both those previous albums connected so strongly, most importantly with Jay-Z and Beyonce themselves as performers. Maybe I'm in the minority here, but the reason why there is such tension and pathos at the core of Lemonade and 444 were how both artists, how much they knew was at stake, and how close they really came to the brink, which forced both of them to be more vulnerable and human than really either of them had been in decades. And Beyonce, she can be a force of nature as a singer, but give the entire picture some human consequences and urgency for herself and her family, and it grounds and intensifies those emotions. Same with Jay. While more of this record is coaxed through an increasingly tangled picture of black capitalism on 444, the songs that truly cut, like the title track, they came with the acknowledgement of how much was nearly lost along the way, which forced him to rap with the most frantic emotion that he has ever brought to the table. But on Everything is Love, well, the battles are won, and while they might get a token reference to some of them on LOVEHAPPY, there's little to no sense of greater stakes or a sense of drama overall. Yeah, Jay might be tangled in legal issues with the SEC, and they're both very much acutely aware of being black in America, which does have its weight, but it's hard to ignore with the increasingly overstuffed flossing that they can just skate away from it without any greater consequences. Hell, both are aware that the organizations like the Grammys and the NFL need them more than the other way around. And look, there's a more philosophical argument to be made surrounding black capitalism and Jay-Z and Beyonce's place in that system that I would just like to set aside right here, mostly because I am not the one to be making that case. And besides, neither have ever claimed to be doing anything but amassing massive sums of money and power and providing that legacy for their families in extremely tight circle, which does have some value, and I'm not expecting either artist to put forward a revolutionary agenda. Well, I'd like to say I could set all that aside until Jay-Z starts trying to compare himself to Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, who are both a fair bit further to the left than he is. And this is where the Magna Carta Holy Grail comparison comes back in earnest, because this album is less about interpreting those grander societal ideas of those great men and more about an association with them because they represent power and prestige in the black community. Hell, in fact, if you dig deeper into the content, there's little to any of the aspirational pathos and insight that gave 444 its weight, with a gap being filled in with brand name flexing on triplet flows that amount to about the least interesting thing that either Jay-Z or Beyonce have ever made. A lot of critics have given Beyonce credit for delivering solid flows, and sure, she sounds fine, but her increasingly flat monotone in this range is little to any of the intensity or flair of her sung vocals, so she can imitate the Migos flow. How is that innovative or interesting? Especially when you're gonna tack on auto-tune on songs like 713 and Friends. She's a great singer, she doesn't need that. And it fares somehow even worse for Jay-Z. Many have said with Magna Carta Holy Grail that he didn't need to hop on choppy new flows, that he was a better MC than that. He could have done something more interesting, and yeah, just as true 5 years later, because he keeps trying to jam in more words to make the rhymes connect, and it comes across as increasingly awkward, with him sounding more out of breath than normal. And that's before you get to the contradictions in the content. Look, I can appreciate Jay saying that you're broke if the folks around you are going broke on Boss, but how does that exactly square away with all the obscene wealth sprayed across the rest of the album that we clearly do not have? Or how Beyonce stresses that her friends are just better than your friends on Friends, where we get one legitimately great line from Jay with "tight circles, no squares, I'm geometrically opposed to you." That just sounds really good, great wordplay. But beyond that, does it feel all that populist for Beyonce to brag about not caring about streaming numbers because Lemonade's not on Spotify? Or how they reference shooting videos in the Louvre? At least at some point the bragging needs to be at least more interesting on the lyrical level, which given all the majority of this is brand name flexing, it is clearly not. Or not at the expense of an audience who will just never get to that point. That's all I'm saying. So fine. Is the presentation at least interesting or gripping from a production standpoint? Well, honestly, while I could say that the easy answer for all that is how they open her Summer, they interpolate a song from Magna Carta Holy Grail and some naked recycling of ideas. But the truth is that Summer is one of the few songs I actually like a fair bit on the album. The soulful guitars, the rich bass, the live horns and strings, it lends the track a relaxed, distinctive opulence that sadly isn't all that common on the rest of the album. As a song later on APESHIT, we get these jagged, rubbery synths, the sandy snares, the Migos ad-libs, and a smoky reverb that makes for a solid trap banger, but little more. Oh, they try to hit more of a happy medium with the richer horns on Boss, but the undercooked hook and the oddly cheap-sounding snares don't really help any greater sense of cohesion, which becomes all the more true with the hi-hat skitters and the overweight bass beats on Nice, or the incredibly underwhelming muted melodies and bassy trap skitter of Friends. Hell, there's no excuse for how sloppily mixed the percussion is on 713 against the pianos, where half the cymbals and snares sound buried midway to the back of the mix, or the cheap lumpy skitters on Black Effect. For as much as U2 flex, you couldn't get the extra 10 grand to get this mixed properly? And again, the issue here is most inconsistency. The gleaming keys and more refined groove of Heard About Us might be cribbing from Biggie, what else is new coming from Jay, but it feels more cohesive at least, and the soul sample groove of Love Happy with the lo-fi drums and the rich range texture, it really is a damn solid way to end the record, really redeems a lot, showing some great back and forth chemistry between Jay-Z and Beyonce, which if this record seriously tilted into that instead of forgettable trap flossing, I would probably be a lot kinder to any conclusion of the trilogy takes I'm hearing from a lot of music critics. But look, as someone who has never really bought into either cult of personality for Jay-Z or Beyonce, I will freely admit that a project like this, it's probably not for me. But at the same time, especially coming after what they delivered apart, there's no way to consider this as more than just a serious step down. It's not really all that innovative or creative. It shows both artists at their least compelling as performers. The production is slapdash with some really haphazard momentum. I'd almost say it sounds rushed. And if it wasn't for the fact that they both have tons of natural charisma charisma and a fair bit of chemistry can string together some bragging that connects even for me with some decent hooks, I would be panning this out right. I'm sorry. But as it is, I'm thinking an extremely light 6 out of 10 and only recommended for the diehard fans. And really, judging by the muted response I've already seen, I think you all knew that already. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe. I'd be more than grateful. I can imagine this review is going to go down so nicely, so comments down there. Have fun. You want to buy the record, links in the description below. And I got the poll up there for all you diehard fans to tell me how wrong I am. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process or help support the channel, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys have to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even the top 10 list to that schedule. Or want to see more details? Link down there below, and I got the poll up, you want to see more of my schedule to my Instagram, also link down there. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.